the greatest pitchers of all time. For more than a century, baseball has been played, and over that time, many great players have come and gone. A special place has always been reserved in baseball fans' hearts for pitchers among those great players. What makes a pitcher such a crucial component of the game is their capacity to affect the course of a game through their pitching abilities. The history of baseball has seen some outstanding pitchers over the years who have made a lasting impression. Pitchers have had a big impact on baseball's history from the early days to the present. However, some pitchers have become legendary in their own right thanks to their accomplishments and contributions to the game. In this post, we will examine some of the most famous pitchers in baseball history and evaluate why they are regarded as some of the best pitchers of all time. 10. Bob Gibson, 1959 to 1975. For his first 9 seasons, Bob Gibson was fantastic, but in 1968, he was so dominant that Major League Baseball was forced to alter pitching regulations to increase scoring. Gibson won the National League MVP and the first of his 2 Cy Young Awards with a staggering 1.12 ERA and 13 shutouts in 34 starts. Additionally, he had a league-high 268 strikeouts. Gibson maintained his dominance despite the pitcher's mound being lowered by 5 inches and the strike zone being shrunk that offseason. The following year, he struck out 269 hitters, and in 1970, he reached a new high of 274 while winning the Cy Young. During these 5 seasons, he had an ERA of 2.35 and averaged 20.0 wins. 9. Greg Maddux, 1986 to 2008. Greg Maddux made opposing batters seem helpless time and time again on a day when baseballs were oozing with drugs. In the full 7-season run from 1992 to 1998, which includes this 5-year peak, Maddux's ERA and WHIP were perfect at 2.15 and 0.97, respectively. He never reigned supreme in the strikeout department, but he allowed absurdly high rates of both walks and home homers. The closest pitchers, Roger Clemens, Kevin Brown, and Andy Johnson, each of whom had ERAs above 3.00, were more than 22% worse than him throughout those 7 years, according to Fangraphs. The middle 15 years of Maddux's career solidified his reputation as one of the finest painters to ever take the mound, although his first 2 and last 6 seasons were not particularly strong. 8. Roger Clemens, 1984 to 2007. On the mound, Clemens was filthy, that much is certain. The 5-year peak, like with Maddux, is more than 7 years from 1986 to 1992. Clemens had a 2.66 ERA with the Boston Red Sox throughout that stretch, as well as 32 shutouts in complete games and at least 208 strikeouts in each season. Despite having a 21-6 record and a 1.93 ERA, he finished second in 1990 and won the AL Cy Young Award in 1986, 1987, and 1991. In 1986, Clemens was also voted the AL MVP. During this time, his Fangraphs WAR was 54. Nobody else even made it to 34. Well after his peak, Clemens won the Cy Young Award with the Toronto Blue Jays in 1997 and 1998, the New York Yankees in 2001, and the Houston Astros in 2004. It's amazing that he had an ERA of 2.48 in 1986 and was much better in 2005 with a 1.87. 7. Clayton Kershaw, 2008 present. The only guy still playing or recently retired was Clayton Kershaw. But perhaps number 7 on the all-time list is a little too low given how outstanding this left-hander has been. Kershaw had a cumulative ERA of 2.10 from 2011 to 2017. From 2011 through 2014, he led the majors in ERA each year. In 2017, he finished just 0.06 points behind Corey Kluber to win the title. Kershaw didn't pitch enough innings to win the 2016 championship, but his 1.69 ERA was far and away the best. During those 7 seasons, he had an absurd strikeout-to-walk ratio of 5.73. In essence, the man has never been equaled. He had a legitimate shot to win the National League Cy Young Award each of the previous 7 years, but the voters elected to keep him to 3 awards and 4 additional top 5 finishes instead. With a 21-3 record and a 1.77 ERA, he was also named the NL MVP in 2014. 6. Sandy Koufax, 1955 to 1966. Sandy Koufax preserved his best for last while the majority of these pitchers drastically decreased in performance throughout their final few seasons. The left-hander was effective right away, tossing 2 complete game shutouts in just 5 games he started during his rookie season as a 19-year-old. But in his final 4 seasons, he was virtually unbeatable. Koufax had a pitiful 1.86 total ERA from 1963 through 1966 despite pitching through agony and arthritis, which ended his career after 12 years. During that time, he had an annual average of 307 strikeouts and 24.3 wins, including 382 strikeouts in 1965. In 1963, he won both the NL MVP and Cy Young awards. He went on to win the award once more in 1965 and 1966. With his sudden retirement while still on top of the world and us wondering if 2 or 3 more healthy seasons may have been enough to make him the indisputable greatest player ever, Koufax is to baseball what Barry Sanders was to football. 5. Pedro Martinez, 1992 to 2009. From 1997 to 2003, Pedro Martinez reached his pinnacle, which was 7 years of domination. Although he began that run with the Montreal Expos, the majority of it was with the Boston Red Sox. In 1997, Martinez won the National League Cy Young Award nearly unanimously after pitching 13 complete games with a 1.90 ERA and 305 strikeouts. He was the undisputed recipient of the AL Cy Young Award in 1999 and 2000. In the voting, he also came in first place in 1998, 2002, and 2003. He only made 18 starts in 2001 due to a rotator cuff injury, preventing him from competing in the Cy Young Award. In 116.2 innings, he nevertheless struck out 163 batters that season. During those 7 years, Martinez had a 2.20 ERA, 11.26 strikeouts per 9 innings, and 5.59 strikeouts per walk. 4. Cy Young, 1890 to 1911. It is pointless to try to apply Cy Young stats to modern baseball. He pitched 184 complete games with a 1.93 ERA just in these 5 years. In his 24-year career, Clemens threw 118 complete games, making him the pitcher with the most since 1984. The amazing thing is that at the time, this was commonplace. 34 pitchers had at least 100 complete games between 1901 and 1905. Joe McGinnity threw more innings than Young during this time, and in just one of the 5 seasons, 1901, did he lead the AL in ERA? While someone posting the same numbers in 2018 would earn all of the wins above replacement, his peak WAR was never as high as those of the others in our top 10. Even more impressive than a few seasons when he was worth at least 9 wins more than the league average, he did have a WAR of at least 5.6 for 18 straight seasons. 3. Randy Johnson, 1988 to 2009. Flamethrowers aren't supposed to get much better as they get older, but Randy Johnson proved to be a notable exception to that rule in his late 30s. Between Seattle, Houston, and Arizona from 1998 through 2002, the big unit won 100 games. Most absurdly, during his brief stay in Houston, he was 10-1 in 11 starts with 4 shutouts and a 1.28 ERA. Even though he was only with the Astros for 2 months, he received a few votes for the 1998 NL Cy Young. In each of the following 4 seasons with the Diamondbacks, he did take home the Cy Young Award. His ERA throughout those 5 years was 2.63. However, the unreal numbers were the strikeouts. Johnson had 5 seasons in a row with at least 329 strikeouts. Johnson struck out at least 320 hitters in a season 5 times in the previous 40 years, and he did so each time. Consecutively, during this half-decade, his K/9 was 12.33. 2. Christy Mathewson, 1900 to 1916. Because of this, Christy Mathewson's cumulative WAR isn't quite as high as players like Young, Randy Johnson, and Walter Johnson, whose careers were each a few years shorter than those of the other players in our top 4. But what he managed to do in his 14 full and 3 partial years is amazing. Mathewson's best season as an individual occurred 2 years before the beginning of his multi-year peak. He led the National League in strikeouts for the third consecutive season in 1905, winning 31 games with a 1.28 ERA. And as we'll discuss shortly, he had a fantastic World Series performance. But from 1907 to 1911, he had 139 victories, 27.8 per year, a 1.69 ERA, and a 0.96 WHIP. During this time, he recorded 12 of his 30 career saves and averaged 6.8 shutouts a season. Mathewson's KBB ratio, 3.98, was rock solid and substantially higher than that of other legends of this era, like Johnson, Young, and Grover Pete Alexander, even though his K/9 rate doesn't compare to pitchers from more recent generations. 1. Walter Johnson, 1907 to 1927. The best part of Walter Johnson's career is that any 5-year period from 1907 to 1919 can make you incredibly impressed. Only twice in those 13 seasons did he record an ERA above 1.90, and it never went above 2.22. Most of his efficiency numbers were affected by his final 8 seasons, but through 1919, he had 297 victories with a 1.65 ERA, 0.97 WHIP, and 5.75 strikeouts per 9 innings. That strikeout rate doesn't seem impressive in the context of today's game. The Big Train, though, led the AL at the time in total strikeouts in 12 of the league's 15 seasons. However, if we had to choose just one 5-year peak, we would choose the first half of the 1910s. Thanks in large part to 41 of his record-breaking 110 career shutouts, Johnson averaged 29.4 wins per season with a 1.50 ERA. In particular, 1913 was absurd. He had a record of 36-7, a 1.14 ERA, and 11 shutouts. From 1910 to 1914, Johnson struck out 1,291 batters, 467 more than any other pitcher could claim at the time.